Right folks, and welcome back to the WTF Radio Shack, the Woolgar Test Facility. And tonight we've got another video on amateur radio stuff. I know you guys are probably waiting for all the jet engine stuff, but I tell you, it is coming, it is coming. Anyway, moving on. So tonight we're going to take a look at this radio here, which is an old Collins ART13, and some people say it's quite legendary in many respects, and it's quite an old thing, but it's got a bit of character, so that's what I wanted to sort of explain a bit about it and how it all works. So this radio was actually, as I mentioned, World War II. It's American. We won't hold that against them, but it's quite interesting because if you think about it, I mean, many people, when we think about World War II, especially in aviation, and this is actually from an aircraft, we always think, all the great planes for World War II, the Spitfire, the Hurricane, the P-51, the Mustang, the B-29, there's some great planes and great engines associated with them, like the Spitfire had the Merlin, etc, etc. But we don't always think about what radios were actually used, and radio communication in World War II is actually quite important. It really evolved quite a lot, and there were some legendary radios out there, radio transmitters, and without those, certainly we would have been in, we would have had a lot of difficulty, put it that way. Anyway, as mentioned, this is an American radio, and the Americans, I think, compared to the Brits, they were certainly in terms of the quality of the engineering, were streets ahead of us. I mean, in our planes, such as the Lancaster and the Wellington, the Halifax, we had the trustworthy T1154 and T1155 transmitter receiver combination, which were good radios, you can't deny that. But if you compare it to the Collins ART13 transmitter, I mean, this thing was really, in terms of engineering, streets ahead of what the Brits had. So what we're going to look at is why this radio was so much better than, well, certainly in my opinion, so much better than what the British were using. And I think the power output of this is about 100 watts, but what makes it really quirky and quite clever is this arrangement down here, which I'll demonstrate. It's basically almost like a mechanical memory, which you can program all the channels into, and it will, a bit like clockwork, whatever channel you select, it'll whir and buzz and select all the different preset channels you put in there. I mean, back then we didn't have anything like digital memory or anything like this. This was all electromechanical, and it really is quite ingenious the way it works. And again, once I've set this thing up, we'll have a look at it. Anyway, I'm going to make a few connections and power the thing up, and we'll also take the top of it and have a look inside. This radio up here, incidentally, is actually the BC348, which is actually paired with this. This is actually a receiver. I'm not going to pay too much attention to this. It was not a bad receiver. This one here is a little bit deaf, but I just put it on display to show you the combination, because this is what was used in the American bombers, well, certainly the large aircraft during World War II. In actual fact, something like this would have been used on a B-29 Super Fortress, and I know for a fact that this combination was used on the Enola Gay, the famous bomber that dropped the atomic bomb over Japan towards the end of the war. Anyway, enough chat, let's go and have a quick look and set it up and have a look inside. Right, so this is a close-up of the ART13. As mentioned, World War II, came into production around about 1940, and it is 100 watts output. The PA is an 813, or as I like to say, as the Americans say, an 813, and it's modulated by a pair of 811s. And as you can see, it's fairly simple. There's not really that much to it, really. So you've got a button over here which is to test it, which basically keys the transmitter. Local remote, we don't really use that much, we usually keep it on local. We've got our antenna current meter here, This is a multifunction meter. It measures the grid current and the plate current of the 813. Moving down, we've got, this is the function switch. We've got basically the switch is off. You've got a voice or CW. So voice is basically AM, CW, and modulated CW, which is Morse code. And then down at the bottom here, we have operate, tune, and calibrate. That's the switch for the meter. And here, this basically controls the channels, which unfortunately the writing here has worn off over the years. So this is all part of the auto tune mechanism down here, and basically these three tune or adjusters basically control the PA and the antenna. So this is the antenna loading, which is basically a coil, and here you've got the plate adjustment, which doesn't use a capacitor, incidentally. It basically alters the inductance of the tank coil. And this one again is part of the PA tuning. So we'll just focus on the other half of the radio. So at the top here you've got a removable crystal oscillator unit, and you can switch between the variable frequency oscillator and a number of crystals. I've actually used it on the VFO. I think this particular one is a bit faulty, but I only use it on the VFO. This area here is actually the VFO and the frequency multiplier. So this thing will cover somewhere around about just below 2 megs, probably a bit lower actually, all the way up to 18. So that's the frequency multiplier. You basically set the band with this one, and this one here is the VFO. And the VFO on this is actually remarkably stable. It really is quite good, and it's only good enough for CW or Morse code. It doesn't really drift hardly at all. So that's more or less the basic layout. What I'll do now is I'll take the lid off just to show you the inside, and we'll then fire it up and I'll give you a demonstration of this rather peculiar auto tuning mechanism. Right, luckily opening this ART13 isn't too much of a mission. You just simply undo these 2 screws and voila, there it is. That's the top. Well, I'll see if we can get a bit of a closer look at some of the valves or tubes, and yeah, might fire it up a bit later on, give you a demo. Right, if we start this part of the radio here, this is actually the speech amplifier here, and I've got a spare one here which I'll show you a bit close up, because these are actually all like modules. They all come out, which is quite nifty. So that's the VFO tube, 876. We've got 2 1625s, which are 12 volt versions of the 807, which are a part of the frequency multiplier. And so the frequency multiplier, VFO, and speech amplifier are all in this section here. Well, as you can see here, I've got one of these audio amplifier modules on the bench, which is actually a spare one that I've got. And if we look at it, you can see that it's pretty well made, very rugged. And this thing simply unplugs. You've got a Jones plug in there, and you just doink, whack it in like that, and that's about it. So you've got a switch there, which, as far as I can remember, selects what sort of microphone you're using, either dynamic or a carbon mic. And this knob here, I'm pretty sure is the gain. I think this is built into a fairly standard design. So you've got some valves here. That's a 6v6. I think that's probably another one, and the one at the end here, VT162, whatever that is, probably a small audio pentode of some description, like a 6 SK7 or something of that type. Metal valve, which the Yanks were quite fond of actually. They seem to like these in a lot of their equipment. And then open that one there. That's a CV140. Again, it's a military valve. No idea what that is, but it looks like a double something or rather. It's got 2 anodes, probably a double triode of some description. Or a double diode perhaps. Anyway, there we are. So that's and underneath you can see as well. Just zooming up to the camera, it's quite well made. It's very well solid. And this thing actually still works after, you know, 70 odd years, 80 years, whatever it is. Quite amazing, really, when you think about it. And the caps, the capacitors, which often deteriorate, surprisingly still working fine. So there you go. Right, that's that. This part here is the crystal oscillator unit. I've got one crystal there, but again, as I mentioned before, I usually use the VFO, and that's the, I think that's another 1625 in there for the crystal oscillator unit. And then right in the corner here, you can just about see that's the plate choke for the 813. The 813 sitting down there, and a little bit further on, we've got a few bit more other bits and bobs, which I'll give you a close up in a minute. Right, these are our two 811s, and that's the modulation transformer. And this rig is quite interesting because the 813 has a separate winding for the for screen modulation. You know, in a lot of AM designs, the screen voltage to the PA tubes often just goes via a dropping resistor, which is modulated with the plate voltage. But this transformer has a separate winding for the screen grid of the 813, which I suppose is quite a good idea. Certainly produces good audio anyway. Right, in this section of the radio, we've got a few interesting things I want to point out. So this box here is basically a relay box which is operating the aerial changeover relay. And what you'll notice in the ART13 that the aerial changeover relay is actually quite a high quality vacuum relay. And from what I can gather, I think one of the reasons why they had this type of arrangement was that they were quite paranoid, obviously, about, you know, lightning strikes, static build-up, and things like that. So they didn't really take any chances. So they've put a high-quality vacuum relay there. Got another few other bits and bobs down here. We've got this is a tuning capacitor for the antenna. This big coil here is part of the PA tank circuitry, and over here you've got another chunky relay, which can't really remember off the top of my head what that one actually does. Might be changing over HT or something like that. And then you've got the meters here. Just to point out, this radio's still got the original wiring on it. And bear in mind, obviously, this rig is obviously 70-80 years old, so it's quite a testament to the quality of the wiring that, you know, very little of it has had to be removed or replaced. And the design of the radio is really compact, and it does make it a bit difficult to service and to sort out. If you want to get to bits on this rig, it can be a bit of a mission, particularly with things like the auto tuner, which can be really quite difficult to remove. I did it once, and it was don't intend doing it again. So that's more or less gives you an idea of the sort of PA and antenna sections of the radio. One last piece I should mention before we try and fire this thing up. This is actually the power supply that goes with the ART13, and as you can see, this is one seriously big dynamotor, and just for sake of comparison, that is a sort of more standard dynamotor you might find in a military transmitter or receiver. This is a 250 volt at what about, I don't know, 150 milliamps, something like that. This big bugger is something like, well, it's got two windings, 700 volts at where was it, 350 milliamps, and 400 volts at 750 milliamps. So this is one serious thing, and this thing you would connect up to 24 volts from usually in an aircraft, obviously, and away you go. I'm actually running this ART13 off a homebrew power supply, which makes life a lot easier. But yeah, this is a big thing. And the problem with running it on a dynamotor like this is that you've got to have really big batteries. This thing draws an awful lot of current, especially on starting it up. We'll have to maybe do a separate video, because I've never actually run this thing. It's actually new old stock, never been run, never been used. So I've got to try and set this up with the ART13 with the dynamotor. Trying to invest in some huge batteries. So there we go. So that's what you would use with this, the whole setup. But it does weigh. It is a real big brute. Anyway, perhaps we'll connect it up one day. Right, I've got everything set up, and I'm going to show you this utterly bonkers auto-tuning mechanism. Now, the way this works, as I mentioned previously, you've got different settings here for each of these antenna and the PA tuning, and also the VFO at the end. And what you would do normally is, if you want to say go to a particular frequency, you would unlock these things unlock, and then you would set each one depending on what frequency you'd want, and then that would, by doing that would more or less be stored in its mechanical memory. So if you wanted to change channel, all you have to do is press the button or switch this switch here, which I'll show you in a minute, and the thing will then automatically, it actually goes back to 0, and then it clunks back into position, and I'll show you how that works. So let's give it a go. You'll see now that red light's come back on again, which means that the transmitter's ready to transmit. So that's the auto-tune mechanism. Now on this one, it's not set up that great. I think it probably needs recalibrating, but as mentioned previously, I'll just leave it on one frequency. But it is quite wacky, I must admit. Right, I think that's more or less it, and hopefully we'll retune it all up and go on the air with it.
So GW0 FZY M1 PVC.
GW0 FZY returning. Yes, morning Paul, and very good morning to the other stations on the net. Andy, G40JY, good signal from you, Andy, this morning, 5 and 9, and also from Trevor, and also you, Paul, very strong signal as usual. Also on the ART13 this morning. I'm actually doing a YouTube video because I've done a whole thing on the ART13 for my YouTube channel, so I hope you guys don't mind being filmed, so to speak. Well, your audio anyway. What can I tell you? Yes, I'm using the WS52 set for receive. A bit of a dull day here in Swansea, not surprisingly, but it hasn't rained so far. Anyway, I'll put it on round. I think it goes to Trevor. I think that's what you said, Paul. I was in a bit of a mad dash to sort of press the play button on the camera. Anyway, I'll put it round to Trevor. Hope you're copying me, Trevor. PA3 BOH in the group from GW0FZY.
Right, this is PA3 BOH. You're just about getting through here. I've got 303 about the 304 and